So the PlayStation 5 recently, allegedly, launched in stores across America, and with its launch came the long-awaited Spider-Man PS4 sequel, Spider-Man PS5. Now I'm a huge Spider-Man/Marvel fan, and this review is guaranteed to happen, especially after the wildly successful PS4 Spider-Man. I didn't review that game when it was the hot new thing because I felt like it was widely accepted as a spectacular Spider-Man game. Hell, some might even say it was the ultimate Spider-Man game.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
Now, I myself wouldn't go that far with my praise of the game, but it definitely returned us to the status quo in a refreshing yet familiar way. Insomniac did not fail us with its take on the Spider-Man license back in 2018, and I feel confident in saying Miles Morales holds up as a nice little expansion to the Spider-Man PlayStation franchise. Expansion being the key word. If you didn't know or just don't remember, Miles Morales was set to be a PlayStation 5 exclusive that would be ready at launch. But in some time between its announcement and launch, Insomniac and Sony had a bit of an information fumble. Sony gave us more info on the game and stated pretty much how big this game would end up being, saying, I guess you could call it an expansion and an enhancement to the previous game. There's a substantial Miles Morales component, which is the expansion element. But also within the game as well, there's been major enhancements to the game and the game engine, obviously deploying some of the major PlayStation 5 technology and features. Now this later rightfully confused people because they were expecting a full game and not an expansion on the original game, but Insomniac themselves then stepped in and clarified that the game is indeed a sequel. I guess the PlayStation VP that said that it was an expansion really misunderstood the question. So with that little bit of confusing information out of the way, Insomniac was clear to give excited players some more straightforward information. Like telling everyone the game would be half the length of the original. Yep, you heard me correctly. It takes 9 hours to finish the main story, and if you're like me and you played non-stop, it only takes 6 hours on the hardest available difficulty. Now is that a bad thing? Well, you'll have to watch the rest of the video and see for yourself. Now, as I said before, the main story is actually fairly short compared to the original game's 16 hours of main story content. Miles Morales cuts down on, in my opinion, unnecessary filler. If you played PS4 Spider-Man, you should know who Miles Morales is. The writers didn't bother to make you replay sections of an old game just because they think you don't know who he is. This is something I like about this game being short. Its shortness doesn't make it any less entertaining or impactful. And for those who really want to know what happened in the previous game, there is an option on the main menu to watch what happened as a sort of catch-up reel. The story of Miles is a nice little detour from the norm we've come to expect from a Peter Parker story. A lot of the story beats return to the same central theme of family. Miles is given the hefty task of looking after New York while Peter goes on a business vacation. This can be seen as a test of Miles' growth during his training as Spider-Man. It isn't until the very end where we see Miles put everything on the line to protect his city that we see he's matured into the hero New York will need when there's no more Peter around to save them. It's pretty much what the game's tagline says: be greater, be yourself. This tagline echoes throughout the entire game, from when Miles first joined Peter in his duties to protect New York to when he eventually came into his own. Be great in your own way is the real message of this game. Right here is essentially where we enter spoiler territory, so brace yourself. I do have some gripes about the story, such as when the main villain wasn't the undeniable jackass but the misguided childhood friend. That one was probably the hardest to swallow part of this game's story. Like, even in the end, Miles ends up feeling conflicted about his friend's role in almost destroying Harlem because she didn't think about her plans enough. I mean, honestly, Finn's role in the game is so jarring at times, bouncing between fighting for the greater good and fighting for vengeance. Her character arc ended in a really unnecessary way too. She pretty much figures out Miles has just been trying to help her at the very end of the story, seconds before Harlem is about to become a crater in the earth. I can't find her sacrifice heroic if she's the main reason why all of this stuff turned out so poorly. Finn ends up being more of a villain than the mega corporation, and I can't see her as a misunderstood hero and sympathize with her. I feel like the constant reminders that Finn is achieving her goals through extremely morally corrupt ways, mixed with her weird readiness to kill Miles for even thinking about stopping her, just makes me see her as the main villain. As a parallel to Miles, it works. Her mentor and father figure died in a horrible way right in front of her, and she knows exactly who killed him. She lost her guidance, while Miles, who was also mostly doing everything on his own, still had the option to ask for help. I don't know. Maybe if they could have resolved the conflict without sacrificing Finn, I would be a lot more satisfied with the ending. But it is what it is, and the ending can't be changed. Miles Morales is a clear-as-day step up from his predecessor on the PlayStation 4. Not only does it look amazing, they give you the option to turn off all the high-fidelity settings and use a 60 FPS performance mode. This option needs to be in every new console release, because if I have to sit through sub 30 FPS gameplay for another 5 years just because some group of Unreal Engine fanatics want to see sweat being produced in real time from a character's pores, I'll lose my mind. Giving the player options will always be a better decision in the long run. But there's this weird need to keep the console player base in the dark about how games work and how they should function. Like, remember when people unironically thought the human eye couldn't see more than 30 frames a second? Crazy times we used to live in, honestly. Luckily, using the performance mode isn't that great of a sacrifice on the game's graphics. I mean, sure, you lose ray tracing, the 4K resolution, more detailed models, and better particle effects, but you get to keep a smooth 60 FPS while you play. For me, that's all that really matters. Don't get me wrong, fidelity mode is amazing to look at. The city just looks unbelievably good, and even more so at night. Swinging around Times Square as the lights zoom past and the reflections of skyscrapers is the best looking thing next to the new Demon's Souls, especially with HDR turned on. But unfortunately, most people playing Miles Morales aren't going to have a monitor/TV that can display the HDR full color range, reach 4K, and is an OLED screen. Not to say that I have one, it's just not something people think about when playing console games, which is why you really don't miss out by playing performance mode. I hope I don't sound like a know-it-all when I explain this stuff. I just want people to understand frame rate and refresh rate are important things to keep in mind for the presentation of video games. Speaking of sound, while Peter Parker's story had a big cinematic score going for it, Miles' story is accompanied by more grounded hip-hop inspired tracks than cinematic ones. For instance, early in the game you get more elements of Peter's soundtrack than you do Miles. This is to show you that for now, Peter is still the main Spider-Man everybody thinks of, but this slowly shifts into more hip-hop/trap styled tracks to fit Miles' personality and show his growth. Then we finally land on a fusion of the Spider-Man sound we've come to know and the hip-hop sound Miles is shown to like throughout the story. Overall, a good soundtrack with some amazing singles thrown in for good measure. Second verse, but slightly changed from the first. Miles Morales expands on the core gameplay from the first game while replacing just the right amount of content without feeling overwhelming. New gadgets like holograms, shock webbing, and a gravity bomb have replaced the tools from PS4 Spider-Man. On top of there being new gadgets, Miles also has two unique abilities. The Venom Strike, and if you've seen Into the Spider-Verse, you could have guessed the other ability is his invisibility. New tools make for a new way to play and new combinations to try. Just like before, you can upgrade your abilities by completing missions and collecting resource points scattered across the map. Some abilities have to be unlocked through challenges, which are also scattered across the map. And finally, if you want to unlock everything, you have to beat the game on New Game Plus. For the most part, it's a pretty standard game loop that most people will already be familiar with if they've played the Arkham series or literally any other action-adventure game after the Arkham series started. The shortness of this game isn't immediately noticeable while you're casually playing, so you don't have to worry about not getting the value for your dollar. Although, if you care about that, you could also purchase a cheaper game and receive a longer total playtime. Miles Morales has a pretty solid amount of content for being a short AAA title. They managed to find a good balance that doesn't feel like it's obviously setting up for a sequel. Venom Strike, in my opinion, is the most fun addition to the established systems because it's not just used for combat, it's also used to traverse the open world. It's usually accumulated from combat, but you can also earn it during web swinging by performing trick combos. The Venom system adds another layer to the already extremely fun web swinging in the PlayStation Spider-Man series. Really knocked it out of the ballpark with that one, Insomniac. Now, I do wish this game had some more endgame content besides just playing the story again, because my first pass through the game was done on the hardest available difficulty, and I managed to run through the content pretty quickly. The worst thing about that is I was streaming this game. I didn't play unless I was streaming, and that probably added to the total time it took for me to beat the game, but it didn't really add to the hours that I was playing. The only other time I spent playing the game was after I finished the main story, where I was just running around the city finishing up all the remaining map markers. So in total, the game took me 6 hours to finish the story, and then boosted up to 9 hours once I was trying to 100% it. So with all that in mind, it probably would have been beneficial for them to add some more challenge modes, or an endless wave-based survival mode like in the Arkham games. More content for the endgame, even if it's just endless challenges, would be nice. Open world games have suffered from taking way too much of the player's time, and this game cuts away at the excess fat, only leaving behind a tight, compact experience. It's a positive and a negative depending on how you look at it. As you could have gathered by now, the game is fun but surprisingly quick, and that's not a bad thing. Insomniac got straight to the point with this one and let the player experience a new kind of Spider-Man. From the story to the gameplay, everything feels unique and separate from PS4 Spider-Man. They managed to make Miles the star of the show without killing off Peter Parker, and this lets people naturally come to like Miles and his supporting cast of characters. The Spider-Man experience becomes that much more grounded when you see it through Miles' eyes, and the portrayal of an Afro-Latin American teen gives us a shot of rich culture to deepen Miles' character. Insomniac has done a lot of good with this game, whether or not people realize it. From robust accessibility settings to diverse character representation and political commentary, and a trend of bloated, mind-numbingly drawn-out, shallow, checkbox-filling open-world games. Miles Morales is exactly what we needed. So, if you're a Spider-Man/Marvel fan, you probably already own this game. Let's be fair. But if you've never heard of Miles Morales or never cared for comic books, give this game a try. Just for its inspirational, feel-good nature and clean gameplay loop, It's worth the money, especially when it's bundled with the remastered version of Spider-Man PS4. I mean, look at the improved... Whoa! Who is that? There's fucking kids playing outside. Literally, like, 2 minutes after I start recording this. Oh, such great timing.